We've asked Tom about his family's background, and it was a very complicated response. He detailed his life in their shabby apartment after what he says his good-for-nothing father abandoned his family in. He lives with his mother, Amanda, and his older sister, Laura. We've brought them on today to elaborate on the life inside the Wingfield family household. We're your hosts. I'm Caitlin.
And I'm Cecilia, and this is Searching for Understanding, the Glass Menagerie.
Our first guest is none other than Tom Wingfield himself. What would you say your role is in your family, Tom?
My mom wants me to fill my father's shoes, and she's not really discreet about it. My father left me when I was younger, with a postcard that read, "Hello, goodbye," with no address. I work in a shoe warehouse. My mom doesn't realize the stress I'm under to provide for my family.
How do you feel about your current job or employment situation?
If I'm being honest, I'm truly not fond of it at all. Working at a shoe warehouse isn't really ideal for me. All my life, I have longed to just write poems and stories and do something meaningful with my life. But you see, my mother just doesn't really have the same outlook.
How so?
Well, she views me as the man of the house, a provider, if you will. With that comes a responsibility of having a stable job and monthly income. If I told her my true interests and intentions, I don't think she'd approve. My mother is by far the more traditional type. She just doesn't have an open mind, a creative mind, like myself.
How did you feel about inviting Jim over as a gentleman caller?
Well, I was pretty skeptical at first. Setting up my coworker with my sister without them knowing each other seemed unethical. But I talked with my mother, and she used her persuasive charm, and as always, I agreed to do her dirty work, predominantly out of fear of disappointing her yet again.
How would you describe your relationship with your mother? Do you think your alcohol and cigarette addiction plays a role in your relationship?
Well, hold on. I wouldn't say I have an addiction. I'm just simply trying to live my life and make the most of it. And my mother just doesn't understand. I go out frequently, like any guy my age. My mother just can't get off my back about it. We get in fights often because, although she won't admit it, she depends on me for money, like I am my father. And just like him, I want to escape. I go out, sometimes I happen to get drunk, but she always gets her way in the end, as I always end up apologizing despite my wishes to escape.
It seems like Tom can't catch a break.
Yeah, controlling mothers are the worst.
Speaking of mothers, let's talk to the woman herself.
Our second guest on our podcast is none other than the infamous Amanda Wingfield. So, Amanda, how would you describe your relationship with your children?
I just wish for the success and happiness of my children. Tom, he's always out and about, and I never know where that child is. He says he's at the movie theaters, but I don't think so. He always comes home drunk, and Laura has to see this, so, that leads to quite a bit of arguments, disagreements, you could say. But I just think sometimes we don't see eye to eye. He works in a warehouse and he needs to keep his job to supply this family, but he doesn't really prioritize that like I do. And Laura, she's quite peculiar. She flunked school. She's a pretty young lady, but she doesn't have as many gentlemen callers, back in my day. Oh, back in my day, I had loads of gentlemen callers.
Speaking of gentlemen callers, how did you meet your husband?
All of my gentlemen callers were sons of planters, and so, of course, I assumed that I would be married to one and raise my family on a large piece of land with plenty of servants. But man proposes, and woman accepts the proposal. To vary that old saying a bit, I married no planter. I married a man who worked for the telephone company. A telephone man who fell in love with long distance.
It sounds like Amanda truly cares about her kids, but maybe she's just not expressing it in the best way.
Yeah, I think she does too. But she does have quite the ego. We've heard from her younger brother, Tom Wingfield, and we've heard from her mother, Amanda Wingfield. Our final guest on the podcast is Laura Wingfield. So tell me, Laura, do you feel that your mother is controlling towards you and your brother?
It just depends, honestly.
Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, from an outside perspective, it probably seems like my mother is really controlling. But for me, I just know that she cares about my brother and I a lot, and that's the reason she acts the way she does.
Is the life your mother finds ideal for you what you want?
Um, well, I'd say it's not exactly what I want for my life. Honestly, it's not that I don't want the same things for myself as my mother, it's just that she's rushing me into it so quickly. I myself like to take things slower. It gives me time to process and work out my problems. However, when I try following my mother's plan, it's just so intense and rushed, and I'm constantly messing up and disappointing her. For example, it's not that I don't want a gentleman caller or to settle down and get married. It's just that whenever I meet people, I get so nervous, and Mother just doesn't understand that. She's always forcing me to go out of my comfort zone, and sometimes not in a positive, respectful way. I remember once we had a man over. It was Jim, and I was so nervous that I became sick. And Mother didn't even care. She forced me to sit with them during dinner until the point where I nearly fainted.
Ooh, who's Jim? Do tell.
Well, Jim. He was my first gentleman caller. Probably also the last, but he was also my high school crush, which made things a little awkward when he showed up for dinner. I remember once I had been absent with pleurosis, and he called me Blue Roses. I'll never forget that.
How did you feel when Jim told you he already had a girlfriend?
When Jim told me that he had a girlfriend and was probably engaged, it really just took me by surprise. I mean, I was so shocked, but at the same time so disappointed. Because that night we really had a moment, I feel. And I think it was just so terrible of him to pursue me in that way and just to disappoint me like that after. It was a terrible feeling.
And there we have it, a deeper understanding of how Laura feels. We now know that she thinks her mother Amanda's attempts to express her love end up in disaster, and that her relations with Jim were unrequited, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We are so glad you could join us on this adventure through the Glass Menagerie. This is Cecilia and Caitlin signing off.